Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 845, and today is October 14th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to get into on today's program. Want to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to subscribe to the show on YouTube. Also, check out my other show, The Kyle Anzalone Show. Follow all my work on my Twitter handle at Kyle Anzalone _ every show that I put out. Every article that I write, whether for antiwar.com, judgenap.com, or the Libertarian Institute, can be found by following me on X. We are 25 followers short of 10,000, so if you don't follow me already, head on over and do so and help me hit that number. All right, starting off here, this article I wrote last week for the Institute. Defense officials say strikes on cartels could happen inside Venezuela. As the U.S. is engaging in a large military buildup in the Caribbean, there is a growing number of statements from U.S. officials suggesting that the bombing campaign inside Venezuela could begin soon. Starting in September, the U.S. began conducting strikes against alleged boats operated by Latin American drug cartels. Defense officials told The Atlantic those operations could soon expand to inside Venezuelan territory. The officials explained that campaign could extend inside Venezuelan territorial waters or include drone strikes inside its land borders. The State Department has designated about a dozen Latin American cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. President Donald Trump says the U.S. is in armed conflict with narco-terrorist cartels and has authorized the Department of War to conduct lethal strikes. Now, as of the time I wrote this article, there were at least 21 people killed in 3 bombings of Venezuelan ships. I believe that number is now up to 27 people dead and at least 4 Venezuelan ships bombed by the U.S., as just before we recorded live, we had the Trump administration announce they conducted another strike. There is growing concern that the cartel strikes against cartels will expand beyond the gangs to the Venezuelan government. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have claimed that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is the leader of a designated narco-terrorist cartel. The Atlantic notes there are problems with the Trump administration's allegations against cartels. The White House lacks evidence for the claim that Maduro is the leader of a cartel, and only a small amount of drugs in the U.S. are trafficked through Venezuela. Last week, Trump ended all negotiations with Venezuela. That was 2 weeks ago now. And then last week, one Politico reported that a person familiar with the Trump administration said there is now a coherent whole-of-government strategy to eliminate Cartel de los Soles and its leader, which they say is Maduro. And so this cartel that doesn't even exist, they claim that Maduro is the leader of. He's not the leader of any cartel, and they're going to use that to try to go to war with Venezuela. Absolutely insane policy, but I'm very worried that they're going to go through with it. Next up here, U.S. aiding long-range strikes on Russian energy targets. I wrote this one on the Institute on the 12th. Officials say Washington is providing critical intelligence to Kiev, allowing Ukrainian intelligence to target Russian energy sites far from the front lines. According to the Financial Times, multiple U.S. and Ukrainian officials confirmed American intelligence shared with Kiev has enabled strikes on important Russian energy assets, including oil refineries far beyond the front lines. The U.S. intelligence helps Kiev shape route planning, altitude, timing, and mission decisions, enabling Ukraine's long-range one-way attack drones to evade Russia's air defenses. So that was all from the Financial Times. Ukraine has claimed multiple successful drone strikes on Russian refineries hundreds of miles from the Ukrainian border in recent weeks. The Financial Times reports that the intelligence sharing began in July. The intelligence sharing is a notable escalation in the war under President Donald Trump. The White House was critical of Joe Biden's policy of his support for the proxy war in Ukraine. Biden had discouraged Zelensky from strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. President Donald Trump's rhetoric has also been increasingly supportive of Ukraine winning a military victory in recent months. In August, he urged Ukraine to go on an offensive. In September, Trump posted on Truth Social that Kiev was positioned to win back all of its territory, and Moscow had been exposed as a paper tiger. Trump has expressed that he believes that the war in Ukraine should have been easy to end, but has been frustrated with his inability to get Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin to reach an agreement. He recently expressed that Russia would need to feel the pain to reach a deal. Trump and Zelensky held 2 calls this weekend about the U.S. supplying Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles. It's unclear if Trump has made a decision to provide Kiev with the Tomahawks at this time. Now, update on that article is that Trump and Zelensky will be meeting on Friday. In fact, this is the write-up I have here for JudgeNap.com to discuss supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. Now, one interesting kind of dynamic in all of this, and this is in an article I just put out today right before we went live, so I don't have it loaded up here, at the Libertarian Institute, where the Kiel Institute, which has done a lot of tracking on the more public side, right? It's like going by the official numbers of the Western arms support for Ukraine. But by their tally, the amount of arms going to Ukraine was down 57% in July and August of this year. And that's as far up as they've calculated it. So it seems to be having a significant dip at this point in time. Now, of course, this is in part because of Trump saying that, look, I'm not going to give the Ukrainians any more weapons. If the Europeans want to buy them from the U.S., if Ukraine wants to give us rights to their minerals, or let us have the proprietary intellectual property rights over the drone technology that, of course, our CIA has developed for them, okay, we'll sell them weapons that way, but we're not sending them any more weapons for free. And so that's a part of it, but they also note that the Europeans are not buying as many U.S. weapons as they were before for the Ukrainians, are sending them as many weapons as they were before. So it's just a really interesting dynamic where at one point, you have Trump engaging in this uber hawkish rhetoric, flirting with giving the Ukrainians Tomahawks, and ramping up the economic war, going further than Biden did in helping Ukraine arrange long-range drone strikes inside of Russian territory. But at the same time, there has been this, what seems to be significant curtailment in Western military support for Ukraine. And I mean, this seems like the worst possible strategy of all for Ukraine. You're going to bomb the Russian oil refineries from a long range away, which is going to upset Russia, lead to Russia escalating its attacks on Ukrainian sites, energy sites and things like that, hurting the Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. And it's going to make talks and a deal less likely. And so I think this kind of two-pronged approach, where we're not giving Ukraine as many weapons, and that means they're probably going to lose the war even faster on the battlefield, and at the same time taking steps that are going to cause Russia to escalate the war further, is overall just a losing policy for the Ukrainians. All right, next up here, this article by Dave DeCamp, October 9th, antiwar.com. Coalition urges Trump to reverse U.S. shift away from strategic ambiguity to Taiwan. So a group of 15 organizations across the political spectrum is urging President Donald Trump to reduce military tensions with China by reversing the U.S. shift away from the policy of strategic ambiguity concerning Taiwan, and reaffirming the One China policy as he engages in with Beijing in trade negotiations. And so the One China policy says that China and Taiwan are a part of the same political entity, and strategic ambiguity is a policy where the U.S. neither confirms or denies that it would or would not go to war against China to help Taiwan maintain its independence from Beijing. And so this has two benefits. One, China doesn't know and thinks that we probably would attack if they attack Taiwan, and so that deters China from attacking Taiwan. And the second benefit is Taipei isn't sure that they would get U.S. support if China attacks, and so it stops Taipei from being too provocative and, say, declaring independence or something like that from China. And so, I don't necessarily love the policy. I think it's far better than the policy that we are kind of moving towards at this point in time. All right, next up here, this article that I wrote for, never mind, skipping this one. Next up here, I believe, is this article. Post October the 7th discussion show Israeli government was uninterested in saving hostages. So, following Hamas's kidnapping of over 250 Israelis during the October 7th, 2023 attack, the Israeli government did not make saving the lives of the hostages a priority. Internal communications within the upper level of the Israeli government in the aftermath of the Hamas assault were released by Israel Channel 12 News. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich urged the government to ignore the hostages. Then, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant argued that Israel should not negotiate the release of the hostages and that rescuing the captives should not be the goal. He said, "We are proposing a plan of action. Here are its components: stabilization of defense, close the border, denial of military and governmental capabilities for Hamas, and changing the defense agreements, creating deterrence. They made a mistake. Our response won't be proportional either. Hostages not among our objectives, but they are not among our objectives, but they center and guide us." So the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Gallant and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for crimes committed in Gaza. The belief in Israel that it cannot prioritize the hostages is a legacy of the Second Lebanon War. Then Israel tried to free captive soldiers and failed. Tel Aviv made a deal with Hezbollah to free the captives. Then IDF chiefs of staff argue not to attach the hostages and missing to the war's objective. That needs to be our lesson from the Second Lebanon War. And so this, I think, is really important, especially the timing in which it came out, because it really does go to show that Israel didn't accomplish the objectives that it set out at the beginning of the onslaught in Gaza. While publicly we heard time and time again that freeing the hostages, returning the hostages was most of the time publicly that came off as Israel's primary goal. Now, I think over time, it became more and more clear that this wasn't Israel's primary goal and that there were even some public statements to that case. But the fact that Israel did not want to exchange its hostages for Palestinian prisoners and detainees, and then that's what they end up doing under this Trump proposal, I think is going to be a real problem for Netanyahu. But by the way, Netanyahu says the military campaign is not over. I wrote this one for the Institute on October 12th. In a televised address, the Israeli Prime Minister said the multi-front war that Israel has fought over the past 2 years is not over. Israel agreed to a hostage exchange and ceasefire last week that could possibly lead to an end of the conflict. He said the military campaign is not over. There are still major security challenges ahead of us. Some of our enemies are trying to recover in order to attack us again. We are on top of this with joint strength. We achieved spectacular victories that stun the world. Netanyahu made the remarks just hours before the last 20 living Israeli hostages held by Hamas were set to be released. Hamas and Israel also agreed to a ceasefire. The deal is a part of a framework proposed by Donald Trump to permanently end the conflict and rebuild Gaza. The statement from Netanyahu suggests that Israel plans to restart the genocide in Gaza or any of the other wars that it has waged throughout the region over the past 2 years. Ansar Allah, the ruling group in Yemen, has imposed a blockade on Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, but that was a response to the genocide in Gaza. During previous ceasefires in Gaza, Ansar Allah halted its attacks on Israeli-linked shipping. Hezbollah has complained about the ceasefire in southern Lebanon, even as has complied with the ceasefire in southern Lebanon, even as Israel has violated the truce hundreds of times. Over the weekend, an Israeli drone injured a UN peacekeeper in Lebanon. In June, Israel started an unprovoked war with Iran. That conflict lasted 12 days, and the U.S. joined the Israeli strikes on Iran. The war derailed negotiations between Washington and Tehran aimed at establishing a new nuclear agreement. Trump and Netanyahu have threatened to restart the war with Tehran if it resumes its nuclear enrichment program, which of course is not aimed at building a nuclear weapon. It's purely civilian. They see it as key to their sovereignty, but that is the Israeli statement. Now, One thing that makes me think that this Gaza ceasefire deal is not going to make it to the end is this statement from the Qatari Prime Minister, who said that they did a partial deal and let the more difficult issues to be resolved later. So things like, is Hamas going to disarm? Who's going to rule Gaza after Hamas goes? Those subjects were not addressed in the current ceasefire negotiations. This is, I think, very similar to the January deal that Trump got done, where, you know, it was a little bit more phased, right? Where this time Hamas is releasing the captives up front rather than a few every week to ensure Israel continues to comply with the agreement. But once again, it let the major issues to be addressed later. And I think Hamas is going to be in a position where they don't really have a whole lot of leverage, and Israel is going to make maximalist demands. And when Hamas doesn't comply with that, Israel is going to go back to war. So this is important. Hamas agreed to same Gaza deal more than a year ago, but Netanyahu and Biden rejected it. And this was a statement from an Israeli negotiator. And of course, you know, a lot of you are looking at this and you're saying, we already knew this. But it is important when we have an Israeli negotiator just flat out saying that this is the case, that this deal could have been done. And in fact, they could just follow the deal that was agreed to in January through to the end. And the only reason they don't want to do that is because ending the war isn't the goal. Releasing the hostages wasn't the goal. The goal was to destroy Gaza and make sure the Palestinians can never be returned. So just an update on the hostages released. All 20 of the living Israeli hostages were released. I think Israel was at least floating the possibility that there were more than 20 living Israeli hostages when the ceasefire deal was agreed to. I had been under the impression for some time that there were only 20 living Israeli hostages remaining. Now, one of the big sticking points here is the bodies of the Hamas captives. Now, the way the deal was initially reported was that Hamas had agreed to release all the living hostages plus all the bodies. Now it's come out, I guess, during negotiations that Hamas made it clear with Israel that they only know where the locations of between, I want to say like half of the bodies or maybe 2/3 of the bodies are. There should be about 28 remaining bodies. And I've seen numbers between, they either know where the location of 14 or 15 are, or they do not know where the location of between 4 and 8 are. And so those numbers are pretty close, right? It's kind of in that 2/3, half range. And Israel is now claiming that Hamas not returning more of the captives amounts to a violation of the ceasefire pact, and they've started cutting the aid flow into Gaza. So this is bad news. This deal is seems to me to be getting off to a fairly rocky start. That doesn't mean that these things cannot be worked out. Maybe Hamas is dragging their feet a little bit on turning up the bodies. Maybe they see this as a way to guarantee that the ceasefire extends for a week or 2 or 3. I'm not sure kind of what's the thinking here is, or if Hamas is really just turning over the bodies as fast as they could get them, and the fact that there's 55 million tons of rubble in Gaza right now is making it very difficult to get to a lot of the bodies, and so Hamas is just going to need more time before they return them. I think the problem is, and as we kind of established here, Israel doesn't want to see the deal all the way through. And if Israel doesn't want to see the deal all the way through, and it's going to take Hamas time to get the bodies back, I think we're going to see Israel try to exploit that in order to have an excuse to break the agreement. So we could already be headed down that path. I would like to think that Trump would do a lot to pressure Israel to at least abide by the agreement for a few weeks or a few months, not just a few days, but who knows. So this is interesting. This one, Dave DeCamp, October 9th, antiwar.com. U.S. sending 200 troops to Israel to support and monitor Gaza's ceasefire deal. The U.S. is sending about 200 troops to support and monitor the Gaza ceasefire deal, the Associated Press reported on Thursday. The U.S. officials who spoke to the AP said that U.S. troops are being deployed as a part of a team that will include partner nations, NGOs, and private companies. U.S. Central Command will establish a civil-military coordination center that will help ensure the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza and provide logistical and security assistance. One of the officials said that no U.S. troops will be sent to Gaza. However, according to a report in Middle East Eye, Egypt has informed the U.S. that it wants U.S. military personnel to be a part of the peacekeeping force that is expected to be established by the Gaza ceasefire deal. A second U.S. official told the AP that U.S. troops have already started arriving to Israel to establish a ceasefire coordination center. Another official said that some of them are coming from CENTCOM, while others are heading to Israel from other parts of the globe. Although the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt said the troops are already stationed in the Middle East. Leavitt claimed a report of the U.S. deploying troops to Israel was not true, but then confirmed the U.S. was sending military personnel to the country. The U.S. has at least 100 troops inside of Israel that operate two THAAD missile interceptors that the U.S. has deployed to Israel. The U.S. deployed the THAADs first in 2024 and a second one this year. The system fired about 150 interceptors to defend Israel during the 12-day U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, costing at least $2 billion. So this is, all pretty important. All right, next up here, this one I wrote for the Institute on October 12th. U.S. secretly worked to expand Israeli-Arab security ties during Gaza genocide. So if there is a way to positively interpret what's happened in Gaza with the deal over the past 2 or 3 weeks, I think this is a piece of that narrative. So this basically says that since, I think, 2022, and this started under Biden, continued under Trump, the U.S. invited Qatar, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to participate in sessions in planning for a combined air defense system over the Middle East. And so if we look at what's happened over the past couple of years, when Israel has gone completely rogue, started a war against Iran, blew up the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and Iran has retaliated with missile strikes on Israel. Iran's retaliated with missile strikes on Israel. The U.S. has helped to intercept Iranian missiles and drones, not just over Israeli territory, but over Iraqi and Jordanian territory. And so I do wonder if this program has actually benefited Israel. The security cooperation with all these countries has helped the U.S. to shoot down incoming Iranian missiles that were targeting Israel. So here's where it ties into the Gaza deal. If Trump saw it was important, and maybe Qatar, Saudi Arabia, other countries are threatening to leave this deal, because remember, right, this is supposed to be for like collective air security. And of course, the concern is always Iran, right? At the same time, Qatar was attacked by 10 Israeli missiles in their capital city, a very small country that hosts the largest U.S. airbase in the Middle East. Maybe these countries were thinking to themselves, this really isn't a good deal for us to get into this security agreement when it only benefits Israel's security, when we're still going to be attacked, when we're still going to be vulnerable, and this is just going to help shoot down incoming missiles targeting Israel. And I wonder if that's kind of a part of what really upset Donald Trump, along with, kind of his personal reasons, the jet that the Qataris gave him, all the money that Qatar agreed to invest in the United States economy. I do wonder here if kind of what we're seeing is that Trump was really upset over that. And he actually told Netanyahu that you will accept this deal, you will knock it off. They did put out that statement after Netanyahu apologized, the White House did apologize to the Qatari prime minister for the assassination strike and promised not to do it again. They actually put that statement out publicly, which they probably didn't need to do. It probably caused Netanyahu more embarrassment than he wanted to deal with. And so if that's happened over the past couple of weeks, and Trump really is upset with Netanyahu, and, he's going into Israel and he's putting on a show and claiming he's a peacemaker, and all this is theatrics, but behind the scenes really had enough with Netanyahu, then maybe that's the one way that this deal actually turns into something permanent. I'm not particularly optimistic. I'm not saying that I think that's what's going on here. I'm just saying I think that's the best possible interpretation. And I wonder if the leak of those CENTCOM documents that showed that planning session was happening between Israel and Arab states was maybe a way for the Arab states to express how upset they are with Israel and the U.S. over the assassination attempt on the Hamas leadership in Qatar. All right, this one from Date to Camp, October 12th, antiwar.com. More than 200 bodies dug out of the rubble in Gaza since the ceasefire went into effect. I'm sure the number is going to be a lot higher. It's going to end up being in the thousands, but I did just want to note this for a couple of reasons. One, if you're looking at the daily death count from Gaza, the health ministry numbers are going up quite substantially, over 100 a day. And that's not because Israel is killing that many Palestinians, although they are violating the ceasefire. I think at least 7 Palestinians were killed just today by Israel. But it's the bodies being dug up from under the rubble and then them being added to the tally. And again, there's going to be thousands and 10,000s and maybe tens of thousands more. All right, next up here, Israeli defense minister says IDF will destroy Gaza tunnels once Hamas releases Israeli captives. And so this was a statement from Israel Katz. And this is somebody who I don't think wants the ceasefire to hold. I think he's one of the more extreme members of Netanyahu's coalition, along with Netanyahu himself, that don't want this ceasefire to hold. So I'm wondering how this is going to go. Of course, if the IDF is trying to operate and blow up all these tunnels, then Palestinians could die on the surface, of course, but also this could create more conflict with Hamas, between the IDF and Hamas. And one wonders if that's the goal here, to create a situation where there is a clear ceasefire violation. All right, everyone, that will do it for the show today. Hope you all enjoyed it. I am considering moving the show and doing evenings rather than morning recordings. If anybody has a preference on that, let me know either in the comment section or on my Eds handle. You could shoot me a direct message on Eds if you really want to, if you don't want to make your comments publicly known. But I do appreciate all the support, not only here, but at the Kyle Anzalone Show, and also on my Eds handle at Kyle Anzalone _. Thanks, everyone.